Hi everyone, this is me, Clint again, and I'm making free videos that teach quality engineering step by step so that you can build real skills without paying an expensive course. So last session we covered about leadership, the vision, the motivation, and building teams. Today we're going one level more, and that is once a team actually exists, how does someone help it run without taking it over? So that's uh, facilitation. And once ideas exist inside people's heads, how do they get transferred, understood, and acted on by others? So that's communication. So these two topics are grouped together in the material for a good reason. So facilitation uh, is really communication skill applied specifically to guiding a group process. So here's the roadmap for this topic. So first, why the facilitator is rolled emerge at all, and what a facilitator actually mission is, including the important idea that a facilitator is a marginal role, not a full team member. So second, the two ways facilitator typically operate as a meeting manager or as an observer. Third is the single most important distinction in facilitation is the content versus process. Fourth, what a facilitator watches for during a meeting, the core skills they need, and the different ways they can intervene when something's off. Fifth is the actual facilitation tools like the brainstorming, its various forms, the normal group technique, the multivoting, the conflict resolution, including the three different kinds of conflict of a team can experience. And finally, we pivot to the communication skills more broadly, verbal, visual, and written methods, the five categories of feedback, and how leaders use communication specifically to build shared commitment to a goal. So let's start with why this role exists at all, because it wasn't always part of the how organization work. So this chapter frames thus as a concurrent with the rise of teams. The emergence of the facilitator is as a key organization player happened alongside of the shift toward the team-based work we covered last session. The contrast is generally useful, whereas the old-fashioned boss would simply tell workers what was to be done. A facilitator has to be operate completely differently. They must understand the objectives and the constraints of the team as well as its actual needs. That's a fundamentally different relationship to authority, like command versus understanding. So here's an idea with. So in an ideal world, there will be no need for facilitators at all. Everyone would already have the skills necessary for their roles and would work effectively with everyone else without any help. But as the but for this topic, we are not in an ideal world since all of us are continual learning. So that's really an entire justification for this role in one sentence. Um, the facilitator role is valuable precisely because it makes special additional skills readily available to a team that doesn't yet have them built in. So as we go through the rest of this material, keep in mind framing in that. So a facilitator is not a manager, and it is not there because the team is incapable. They are there because building certain group process skills takes time, and having someone available with those skills accelerates the team owns learning curve. So let's define exactly what a facilitator is trying to accomplish. So because the framing here is subtle but important, a facilitator primary mission is to ensure that a team is successful. But critically, this has to be done in a way that ensures the team, not the facilitator, that is responsible for the outcome. So that's a real tension to hold. So you're actively working to help the team succeed while deliberately not taking the ownership of the success yourself. So that leads to a generally counterintuitive definition of what makes a facilitator good at their job. Uh, a successful facilitator is one who is continually working himself or herself out of the role. So by helping the team develop higher and higher levels of competency. So in most jobs, being indispensable is the goal. In facilitation, becoming unnecessary is the goal. The facilitator's job is done well precisely when the team no longer needs them. So this connects to a specific term for this chapter uses. The facilitator is a term for marginal role. So that's a precise technical description. The facilitators are not actually members of the team that they're working with, and yet in practice, they're usually present at most of the team's meetings, and their role is to provide support that helps the team work better. So this topic gives some genuinely simple examples of what that support looks like in practice. Let's say, for example, notifying the team when it has veered from a meeting agenda, when it has jumped to a conclusion without supporting data, or when it has not allowed all members to voice their opinions. So notice none of these examples involve the facilitator offering a technical opinion on the actual subject matter. So they're all about the health of the process, which sets up the content versus process distinction that we'll cover in the next slide. So facilitator usually have one of the two distinct type of roles within a team, and it is worth understanding because they call for a different postures. The first is meeting manager, where the facilitator actively guides the team through the agenda. This is more visible hands-on version of facilitation, where the facilitator is clearly steering the flow of the meeting itself. The second is observer, where the facilitator sits quietly off to the side and simply comments when it seems necessary or useful to the team's progress. So this role is quieter and less directive by design. And it comes with a genuinely useful secondary benefit, the chapter points out. The observer role also provides the opportunity to gather information that can be used to coach the team leader on their own team process skills. In other words, an observing facilitator is not just helping the team in the moment. They're building a record that helps develop the team's own internal leadership after the facilitator eventually steps away. So neither role is universally better. Which wo- which one a facilitator adopts often depends on how mature the team already is and how comfortable the facilitator is within a given team, something that we will return that we discuss the intervention styles later. So this is arguably the single most important distinction in the entire facilitation topic. So facilitators do not discuss content issues, only process issues. The chapter, for this topic, a work example make this vivid. So imagine like a team trying to reduce the amount of time patients spend in the healthcare clinic's waiting room. So on the content side, the facilitator would not interject a comment like, should we change the patient scheduling process? Because that's a substantial. So technical opinion about the subject itself and offering it would be mean the facilitator is now influencing the actual decision the team is supposed to own. On the process side, though at the appropriate moment, the facilitator might ask, what are the some additional ways that the time could be reduced? So notice how different that question is. So even though it's about the same topic, when it is not proposing a solution at all, it's checking whether the team has taken a sufficient broad view of the opportunity space before converging on an answer. So that's a pure process intervention. So it does not tell the team what to think. It makes sure the team is thinking broadly enough. So the reason this distinction matters so much comes back to the marginal role concept of from the previous slides. Like the moment a facilitator starts offering content opinions, they stop being a neutral process guide and started being a participant with a stake in the outcome. So which undermines the team's ownership of its own decision. So this is generally one of the hardest discipline of a new facilitator to maintain, especially if they happen to have a real expertise in the subject matter being discussed. So the temptation to jump in with a technical opinion can be strong, and resisting it is precisely the job. So here's an important clarification that adjusts everything that we just covered. It is not necessarily that facilitators be someone from outside the team. The team leader or a specific team member who has a sufficient skills and experience can also take on the facilitator role. And here's the key exception to the content versus process rule we just spent the whole slide. So let's say in this case, the facilitator is allowed to contribute content precisely because the person is in fact a bona fide member of the team. So they're not operating in the marginal role an outside facilitator occupies. So the same restriction doesn't apply to them in the same way. So this actually points toward the real end state of the whole facilitation framework is building toward. The ultimate objective stated directly in this chapter is for all teams to be fully capable of working without the need of anyone in a designated facilitation role whatsoever. So in the mature end state, each member simply pays attention to both content and process issues themselves and ensures that the team work effectively as a natural habit. So not because someone external is watching for it, but this reframes the entire facilitator concept nicely. Let's say an outsider facilitator is really scaffolding. useful while a team is building on its own purpose, awareness. And a well-run team should eventually be able to internalize that the awareness across its own members, whether or not one of them is formally wearing the facilitator hat. So, because a facilitator is trying to help a team more effective, there's a generally wide range of things to pay attention to. The chapter list, six specific areas, and I'll expand on all of them because each represents a distinct way a team's process can quietly break down. So, one, meeting agenda. Like, is there an agenda for the meeting at all, and does the team actually follow it, or does it drift? Two is communication. Do the team members genuinely listen and discuss each other's opinions, or does each person simply state their own view without engaging with the others with others? So are the discussions happening on a positive note, or does the negativity, sap with the people's energy? So does everyone get the opportunity to speak, or does the team leader seem to give more attention to some members than others, or do certain individuals dominate the conversation? So three is technical process model. So have the team members actually really engaged in the procedural conflict? So negotiating the where, when, how, and why of the project, like defining the specific steps. They'll take perhaps using something like a seven-step problem-solving model. Or are they simply wandering around with no defined direction at all? So yeah, we need to ask that. So number four is conflict. Is there an interpersonal or procedural conflict preventing the team from working together effectively? Is all the conflict being suppressed, which cause ideas to be quietly withheld rather than voiced? Or is it substantial conflict? For example, like deliberately differing consensus while discussing ideas, specifically to get the best possible ideas being actively encouraged. So we'll unpack this different conflict type in detail shortly. And number five is decision making. Does the team actually make decisions based on data, or does it jump to conclusions? Is consensus specifically used in situation where the decision requires everyone's genuine commitment rather than just a quick vote? And six, the follow up. Does the group actually identify concrete action items and then ensures those items are carried out and rather than just discussed, and forgotten? An effective facilitator needs a generally broad range of capabilities, and the chapter singles out three as the most important. So let's go through each and with the real depth from the text. So meeting management skills. A facilitator needs to know how to run meetings so they effectively use the time available. There's a nice framing device here. Like meetings are in many ways like a mini projects with a mission, which is the purpose of the meeting, a technical process, which is the meeting agenda and boundaries, which is the meeting's duration. And because meetings consist primarily of discussion, the ability to communicate effectively is described as vital. So this is really the bridge connecting facilitation directly to the communication skills material that we'll cover in the second half of this deck. So people skills, second is people skills. Since every person brings their own background, skills, and priorities into a meeting, the ability to understand and work with a different perspective is critical. So it specifically notes that the understanding of psychology, both individual and social methods for change. So drawing from the field of organization development is valuable here. So technical process analysis skills, the third one, is improving the processes requires actually analyzing. So an understanding of the seven basic quality control tools, like the seven management tools, the statistical process control, and the design of experiments gives a facilitator a wide range of tools they can introduce at the appropriate moment. So we'll cover these specific tools in more later in the chapter. But here's the point of this topic that it emphasizes as perhaps the most important of all, and also the hardest actually to achieve, is understanding yourself. So it's difficult to understand others if you don't understand yourself because you may unconsciously make interpretation using filters you're not even aware that you have. So a genuinely effective facilitator has to be able to determine in the moment where a particular intervention they're about to make is being driven by the actual needs of them or by their own personal needs. So a need to feel useful, to be right, to be liked. So that kind of self-awareness is what separates a facilitator who's truly serving the team from one's unconsciously serving themselves while appearing to serve the team. When a facilitator believes a team should change how it's working, they have several different ways to bring to the team's attention, and which one they choose typically depends on a combination of facilitator own personal style and comfort level with the team, plus how the team responded to the previous intervention. So let's go all of the three. So firstly is tell the team. The most direct approach is simply tell the team. So what it's doing wrong or what it needs to be do differently. Like for the minor issues, this is described as a quick and probably safe intervention. However, it can cause resistance with some teams because it can be interpreted as authoritative. So which remember cuts against the whole spirit of the facilitator marginal and non-directive role. So state observations. So as a facilitator, a slightly more discrete approach where the facilitator simply states what they're seeing that the team may want to do differently. So this puts the information in front of the team without telling them what to do about it. So letting them decide for themselves whether to pay attention to it. So number three is have the team explore. The most indirect approach is asking the team members to think about what they're doing at the moment and perhaps framing the context of the issue. Like for instance, whether it relates to communication or agenda problems. So this method takes the most time because it costs the teams to genuinely more ownership of the intervention itself, which means the resulting learning is far more likely to be actually internalized rather than just compiled with in the moment. It's worth repeating something emphasized directly in this chapter that it is vital for the team to have ownership of decisions made regarding content, and when possible, decisions regarding team process too. So a facilitator who gets personal glory for making decisions for the team simply reduces the likelihood that the team will actually learn from you and stay committed to its own process. So there's one exemption that is worth flagging. The Kaizen Blitz teams, which typically run just 3 to 5 days. So in these compressed sprints, acceleration for the improvement process comes partly from the reducing concerns over exactly how decisions get made. So the facilitator in the Kaizen Blitz usually holds much more authority to directly specify the direction the team will take, trading some of the ownership, building patience for speed. So we've now in the facility behavior into actual facilitation tools. Concrete techniques a facilitator introduces to a team. The topic frames the purpose of the idea generation as encouraging creative thinking and cites Robbins cites like we can cite the Robbins and Judges three components of creativity, that is expertise, creative thinking skills, and intrinsic task motivation. The tools we're covering help exercise the creative thinking skills specifically. So most people are already familiar with brainstorming, but it's worth knowing that there are generally distinct variants. Unstructured brainstorming, like a topic is agreed on and written on the front of the group, and the leader or facilitator asks for ideas to be randomly called out. So all recorded without any discussion. So when the flow of the idea stops, the list gets reviewed and discussed, which may lead to eliminating or combining some ideas. Like structured brainstorming uses a round robin process. So each person in the group is tasked to state one in turn, in idea. So if they have none, they pass and the next person is asked. So when a person has passed in single round, the brainstorming is complete. A similar variant posts several sheets of paper around the room. Let's say, for example, each topic and with a problem. And at the top, team members rotate between sheets, like writing ideas as they go until everyone has contributed every sheet. So another simple variant just circulate sheets of paper among the group instead of posting them on walls. And then there's a specifically named technique called the Crawford slip, which is especially useful when a team is working on a sensitive topic or simply doesn't yet have a high level of trust. So all team members write their ideas on individual pieces of paper, which are then handed to a trusted individual, or often the facilitator, who compiles everything into a single combined list. For an instance, like a whiteboard. So the anonymous nature of this method helps people feel free to include ideas that they might otherwise hold back. And the teams often discovered that several members independently had the same ideas, which itself become a small, organic, trust-building moment for that. So both of these tools solve the same basic problem. How do you take a long brainstorm list and actually narrow it down? So let's cover each in detail. So nominal group technique, or the NGT, is one specific way of processing brainstorm list. Using three steps, like first, ask each participant to rank the items in numeric order in a list of 8 items. One is best and eight is worst. Second is record the rank from every participant beside each item. Third is total the rankings for each item. The item with the lowest totals are preferred options, since a low number means people consistently rank it near the top. So this topic own work example shown on the screen so involves a group of course participants deciding where to go for lunch. So five people, let's say for Tom, Joe, Mary, Sue, and Terry, rank for four restaurants. So Marlo's received the lowest total, like 9, which makes it the group first choice and ahead of Grunge Cafe at 10, Fun Cafe at 15, and Stew and Brew at 16. So notice how this method captures everyone's full preference, ordering not just their single favorite, which tends to be produce a more broadly acceptable group choice than a simple first choice voting would. So multi-voting is a different way to narrow down um, a list. So have a group select only items they prefer from the full list. So usually half of the total numbers. After everyone has made their selections, the facilitator asks how many people voted for each option and records the tally. So here's why the Pareto principle typically shows up. Some options they will get a few votes and those get dropped from the list entirely. The voting process then repeats narrowing the list further each round until the desired number of each item remains. So this topic scales this up for a larger version of the same lunch problem, with five people voting across 3 rounds. So selecting four, then three, then finally down to one, and Grunge Cafe ultimately emerges as the winner in round three by decisive 4-1 margin. The key difference to remember between these two tools is NGT, or the nominal group technique, captures the full preference ranking in a single pass, while multi-voting progressively eliminates low support options across multiple rounds. So most people identify conflict as a problem to be solved, something inevitable and undesirable in a team. So often assuming a conflict only happens when two people have totally different ideas and have a choice to be made between them. So this topic pushes back on the assumption directly. In reality, two kinds of conflict, substantive conflict and procedural conflict, can actually enhance teamwork. Only a third kind is genuinely harmful. Like substantial conflict is about actively debating ideas and content to reach the best possible answer. We'll see in the next slide that the deliberately differing consensus is actually not the strategy here. So not a red flag. Procedural conflict is about negotiating how the group itself runs, like the where, when, how, and why of the team's own process. And these two can enhance teamwork when it's handled well, because it forces generally clarity about the team will operate. The third kind is affective or interpersonal conflict. It is one of the actually harmful, and this topic defines it precisely, quoting the Burnett 2005. It results when the team members allow personal feelings or negatively affect group interaction. So concretely, this shows up as a hidden biases surfacing normally inconsequential behaviors suddenly become an irritants or past lights, and unresolved issues spilling over into the team's interactions. For resolving conflict generally, the chapter referenced Killman and Thomas' 1977 framework of conflict resolution styles, like competing, avoiding, accommodating, collaborating, and compromising. So each has its place depending on the situation and stakes involved. So dealing directly with conflict typically means a facilitator or a team member either reminds the team of its own common goal or puts grievances on the table as neutrally as possible to diffuse the situation and negotiate a workable compromise. So not all conflicts can be avoided, but one genuinely effectively preventive measure is called out specifically. So clearly identifying the roles and responsibilities in the team early in the process before ambiguity has a chance to breed friction. So let's go deeper on the substantial conflict first. So by engaging in substantial conflict, teams actively work on at avoiding hasty consensus, things like jumping on the first idea offered instead of waiting for possibly better alternatives, or making decisions before anyone has a real chance to give input. So this topic gives three specific strategies that the team can use to defer consensus deliberately. First is to elaborate key ideas by adding details, examples, or explanations. So remembering that one good idea can speak several other good ideas, which simply gives the team more choices to consider. Second is consider alternatives by adding to an idea or exploring one that hasn't been considered yet. So one team member might add details to help another explain a suggestion or restate an idea so everyone actually understands it in the same way. Third is the voice disagreements physically to strengthen the product or process. And here's an important reframe to remember. So disagreeing does not mean you dislike someone. In fact, disagreeing about ideas can mean you're sufficiently engaged to actually notice both strengths and weakness in what's being proposed. So now, the procedural conflict, which requires negotiation, especially at three specific moments when a team is first convened at a specific milestone on the way to um, a goal and at the very start of each project. Because procedural conflict is about how the group runs. Like participants need real clarity, and chapter recommends writing it down and maintaining a group memory document that tracks. So where and when the team will meet, who takes on which roles, such as team leader, a recorder, timekeeper, or even the the devil's advocate. So what procedures and tools the team will use, like such as consensus versus simple voting, and the anticipated timeline for meeting the team's objectives. So all of these issues matters, and some may generally need to be renegotiated on an ongoing basis to keep the group running smoothly as circumstances change. So a few general guidelines tie all three conflict types together. Encourage people to exchange ideas freely before reaching a decision. Treat decision as a problem to be solved rather than an attack on the person. Take time for basic housekeeping like breaks, room temperature, having enough paper and pens. Keep records of benefits and drawbacks for each option uh, considered, and keep the team goals common and interest visible, especially when the tempers runs high. So one underappreciated technique is asking the team members to restate what's been said in their own words. That generally helps ensure true understanding. And time itself is an ally. So if a decision can be delayed, the gap between discussion often lets people cool off and think more clearly about both their own position and everyone else. So we now shift to the facilitation specifically to communication more broadly. So it's worth starting with the word actual origin because it clarifies what communication is fundamentally trying to achieve. The term comes from the Latin communi communicat, communicatus, or meaning to impart or make common. So when people communicate, they're trying to establish common ground, not just transmit information one direction. So every communication interaction is unique in terms of purpose, context, mode, and the people involved, and communication skills are described as critical for success, whether that success is measured by promotion or higher quality process and products. So Robbins and Judge make a precise point worth quoting directly. Communication can be thought of as a process, and it must include both the transference and the understanding of meaning. So notice both halves of that requirement. Simply transferring information is not enough if it is not actually understood. And understanding without any transfer obviously cannot happen either. So both halves have to occur for communication to have genuinely happen at all. In the quality field specifically, effective communication is essential for everyone to understand and feel a sense of ownership of the common vision. So every employee needs to be aware of the objective and the necessary actions required for successful quality initiatives. And the common goals are described as unifying factor in the virtually all successful teams. Communication can occur on an individual level, one-on-one, from individual to a group, or within a group or team environment. And there are three broad methods for this. verbal, visual, and written. So verbal or oral communication includes interviews, formal speeches, conversations, debate, directives, briefings, whether in person or via telecommunication, and public announcement. But telecommunication tools like Skype or Teams have become especially popular. And sometimes these sessions get recorded and saved for synchronous viewing later. Visual communication includes also like video recordings, even for YouTube videos, along with the graphics, photographs, and images. And written communication spans an enormous range, from the very informal text message, instant message, or tweet, all the way for a formal technical report or peer-reviewed publication. Regardless of the setting or method, the guiding principle is the same: be transparent and as clear as possible. All forms of communication convey a message to our receiver, and quality engineers specifically rely heavily on the discovery and organization of data, facts, and evidence, systematically collecting, analyzing, and organizing the material rather than working impressionistically. So descriptive statistic methods involves data visualization are called as an important part of the analysis process, and some visual displays actually combine visual and written communication together. So this topic, also example is an FMEA diagram, which we'll cover in more technical depth later in this material. So there's a genuinely important caution here about the choosing graphical techniques carefully. Like pie charts, for instance, can be informative when a population or sample can be meaningfully grouped into proportions, but they are explicitly called out as not appropriate for every analysis. The broader lesson is the graphic has to be fit the actual structure of the data and the question being asked, not just whatever visual, familiar, or easy to produce. Technical communication of results often draws in all forms of communication at once, and PowerPoint presentation specifically regarding use when one person is relaying technical information to a group of listeners. So the chapter gives concrete practical guidance here worth taking seriously. The number of slides, use large and eligible fonts, especially for any graph or axis title, which are notoriously easy to make too small to read. So clearly detail and explain the main message of the presentation rather than assuming it's self-evident, and include an outline of the talk so the audience knows where they are in the structure at any given moment. To be successful, a quality engineer should master both discussion skills and presentation skills. The ability to analyze and organize information and then present it orally is described as the something that consistently reap rewards. So clear, concise, and ambiguous writing is called the essential skill on its own right. So it's separate from the oral skill. And practical speaking, practicing presentation ahead of time and actively seeking out of constructive feedback from peers and superiors is also essential. So not an optional polish, but a core part of doing the job well. So feedback is genuinely important component of the communication interaction. So it provides the opportunity for clarification and deeper understanding, closing the loop that makes communication a two-way process rather than a one-way broadcast. So this topic identifies five main categories of feedback that occur in communication exchanges, and it's worth understanding all five distinctly because people often default to just one or two without realizing there are other, sometimes more useful, so options available. One is evaluation, so making a judgment about the worth, the goodness, or appropriateness of the statement. So this is probably the most instinctive feedback mode, like judging whether something is good or bad, right or wrong. So two is interpretation, so paraphrasing or perception checking as a means of clarification. This is restating what you think you heard, specifically to confirm or correct your own understanding before responding further. Three is support, confirming behavior that encourages the sender to keep communicating. This is less about the content at all and more about signaling, keep going, I'm listening, and nods, verbal acknowledgement, and similar cues. Four is probing, attempting to gain additional information, continue the discussion, or clarify a specific point. So this is an active question-driven feedback aimed at deepening the exchange rather than just responding to what's already had been said. And five is understanding, trying to discover what the sender of the message actually intends or means by it. So this is the deepest of the five, going beyond the literal words to underlying intent behind them. So being an active listener and supplying adequate feedback, including the asking relevant questions, matters, especially when communicating as part of the team, where group communication skills require additional considerations: what your role is in the group, when to talk, when to listen, and how to resolve issues if conflict or confrontation arises. Successful quality engineering implementation depends on developing effective teams, and effective communication built on this kind of deliberate pride feedback. Okay, so let's close the communication topic by connecting it directly back to leadership, because one of because that's really where it's all of this converges. So leadership of quality engineering teams and leaders of an organization generally need to pay uh, careful attention to communication details. So leaders must establish a vision, communicate that vision to everyone in the organization, and provide the tools, knowledge necessary to accomplish it. And good leaders understand employee efficient, effective communication, specifically to achieve that. So it's worth remembering, as the topic states directly, that leadership is needed at all levels of the organization, not just at the top. To actually accomplish a stated goal, every member involved has to understand and be committed to achieving it. And one effective way to build understanding and commitment is to include all members in the complete process. Members of the effective teams can feel genuine ownership of programs and projects when they feel understand the goals, the objectives, and mutually well understood expectations. And they're given access to the information and resources they actually need. To, to create that understanding and commitment, leaders employ a specific set of communication skills shown like on the screen, like clear formation of a concept, saying it precisely, not vaguely, emphasis on key points, not vaguely. So next is emphasis of key points, making sure that the most important ideas don't get buried in a detail. Next is repetition, saying that important things more than once, because a single mention rarely sticks. And next, the last part is the summarization, periodically pulling threads back together so people retain the thorough line. And here's the closing thought with this: like multiple channels are absolutely vital to convey a message, given how information has become in today's world. Every listener or reader is bombarded with communication for countless sources all day long, and as the chapter puts it, most of the night too. So a leader relying on a single channel or a single mention of an important message is competing against an enormous amount of noise. I'm sorry, which exactly why clear formulation, emphasis, repetition, and summarization and multiple channels all have to work together to actually get message through and build the kind of shared commitment effective teams and initiatives depend on. So let's bring both halves of this chapter with five closing points, and I'll expand for each. So first, facilitator success is measured by becoming unnecessary, not becoming indispensable. So every skill and behavior we covered, the marginal role, the two facilitator postures, the intervention styles like all serve the one somewhat paradoxical end goal of working themselves out of the job. Second is content versus process. Is the line a facilitator must never cross unless they are also a genuine, bona fide member of the team, in which that case same restriction simply does not apply to them. So knowing which situation you're in is the first thing any facilitator needs to get right. Third is brainstorming. Nominal group technique and multi-voting are three distinct tools solving three distinct narrowing problems. So brainstorming it generates the raw list, the NGT captures the full preference or ranking in one pass, and multi-voting progressively eliminates close support options across several rounds. So picking the wrong tool for situation wastes a team's time. Fourth is substantive procedural conflict generally help teams reach better outcomes. So differing like consensus in negotiating how the group runs are signs of health and not dysfunction. And affective or interpersonal conflict is one of the kind actually harm teams. And it's worth learning to tell the difference in the moment. Since all three can look similar on the surface, a simple disagreement. And fifth is communication must both transfer information and be understood. Either half missing means communication has not really happened, given how much noise every person is bombarded with constantly, and getting a message through reliably requires deliberate repetition, clear emphasis, summarization, and multiple channels working together, not just saying something once and assuming it landed. So that covers both the facilitation and communication. So I hope you give a value for this video and give a thumbs up, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye bye.